Oh, welcome to Glad You Asked. Today, here with Jeff and John Lopez. We're at episode 16. I forgot to say the number last time, so John's getting on me. I am Jeff Henderson, footwear designer.
Much more than that. You went to two, not one, but two amazing academic institutions, right? Was it Purdue and Georgia Tech?
Well, let's be honest. I went to Purdue for like 6 months, and then it got really cold, and I started filling out my transfer paperwork to get to Georgia Tech. To which people are like, "Why did you choose Georgia Tech? Was it for its fine institution?" I was like, "There was the AUC down the street, and it was in Atlanta, and it was really warm. I did not know they actually had an engineering school until I got down there." So yes. Who we got today? Who were you? Who were you, sir?
I'm John Lopez, New York City-based sports photographer.
Okay, now, more than just a photographer, he is also the man who, because he works in video, teaches me left and right that one, my screen is dirty. Two, I don't back up enough of my files because he's got like terabytes of backup, and I'm like sitting here, okay, this file's like 2 meg. I'm gonna have to save it up on some off computer somewhere else. And he's like, "Yo, Jeff, you need to clean that up." I'm like, "Or we can put it on your shared drive." So it's all good today.
So what are we talking about today, Jeff?
Today, we're gonna talk a little bit about getting to an innovative place. So early on, we talked about how soles are made. We talked about some of the components that are used, from EVA to polyurethane, the rubber outsoles, things like that. And so I was working at Kohan, and we were working on something slightly different. So my days at Kohan may be remembered for this one shoe where we put lunar on the bottom of a wingtip. But while I was there, I wanted first to figure out how brown shoes were made. And someone else grabbed me and was like, "Yeah, that's cute, but let's go make this other shoe with the lunar." But in the meantime, it was like, let's see what shoes are made of. And actually, one thing you never want to do around a designer and engineer is put a shoe and say you can do whatever you want. Because the first thing we do is get a knife or a bandsaw and say, "What's on the inside?" So here you'll see this high heel shoe. And I was curious, A, does flexibility help wearing a high heel shoe? I don't know. So I cut one in half. $300 shoe, no big deal. We just get out the bandsaw, we blaze right through it. And then I noticed like stuff started falling out. I was like, well, there's something obviously in there. And I asked them what was in there. They were like, "Yeah, it's a plastic air unit," but there was dust falling out. And I was like, "What is this dust?" And they said, "Well, it's cork." Because traditionally, in the inside of dress shoes, they place cork. The reason is there's lots of glues, there's lots of cements. It's usually made of leather, maybe there's some rubber, but there's nothing that sort of moves with your foot that sort of can add a little bit of cushioning. So what they use traditionally is cork, easily found, kind of a cheap material. I was like, oh, that's very compelling. And if you know, people walk around in cork shoes all the time, like Birkenstocks. So when I mentioned I wanted to use cork as something that would have properties of cushioning, the first thing fashion people thought was, "Oh, so you want a shoe like that?" And I was like, "Is that really cork?" So I took out my knife and cut it and found out that's not really cork. It's a plastic piece on the inside, and it's actually wrapped with a cork fabric. And so when I said let's use cork, people looked at me like I had two heads because they were like, "No, no one does that. That's not fashion. That's not right. It's not innovative." And I was like, "Well, this is cork. As you can see, it's just a mix of compounded materials, cork, and we have a little bit of what looks like plastic. Maybe there's some rubber in there, but I'm like, you can make cork look innovative. You just have to put in effort." They looked at me like I had two heads.
So I'm looking at you like you have two heads now. Did you just do research? Like, how did you know? How did you arrive at this point right here? Before you even got to the next part where you're convincing them, how did you know in your mind cork can look different?
So the reality is, I think when you see things, if you're a designer or you're creative and you want to do something different, you look to things that people feel comfortable with. And people already know what cork is. They're not amazed by cork. They see what it is. No different than air is something you see and breathe every day, and somebody decides, "I'm going to put air in a shoe." Well, somebody might not have thought that was innovative until somebody decided to wrap that in plastic and put it on a Nike shoe, and then it was Nike Air. So taking sort of everyday items and then figuring out, well, it already has properties that work and perform in a way that people have used for hundreds of years. How do we do it in a more modern way? So once you place that thought in your head, the internet is always a nice place. You go to Google and you start searching, you go, here it is. Somebody is actually doing something interesting with cork. Now it's a matter of, can we do something that works and looks interesting? So because most of the people in fashion had no idea what I was talking about, I had to go recruit my guy from old campus, George Cho. George Cho, actual rocket scientist, went to Cal, Berkeley Tech, something like that. Super genius guy, quiet as can be. When I first hired him for the job and he came out to New York, He brought, it was Super Bowl weekend. He came the day of the Super Bowl, flew out, came to the apartment, and brought a bag of homemade cookies, which everybody at the house thought, oh, that's nice. He brought cookies. He's like, yeah, I made these from the recipe from the place down the street, but I forgot to make the ice cream. It was like, you made them from the recipe from the place across the street? He's like, yeah, I heard it was really famous, but I didn't have time to get the dry ice because I made some ice cream from scratch. I told him about coming out there like 2 days before. The man made ice cream and cookies from scratch from the recipe across the street from my place. He's a crazy man. We hired him immediately. So the first thing he did was say, all right, you want to do cork? Let's drop some cork pieces into a rubber outsole that's already existing.
Can I
go ahead?
I just take something away. We can't just go in there and go right back into
Oh, by the way, me and John Lopez, we eat plenty of dessert. So that might have captured his imagination.
So if you want a job, if you want to work for Jeff, here's the recipe.
Here's the key. These are major keys right here.
Feed him. Bring sugar. Bring sugar and you are in.
Copious amounts. I got friends to feed. This is how it works. So the first thing George did was say, hey, can we actually put cork in things? Does it actually work? Does it mean anything? So we actually took an existing rubber outsole, a mold, and dropped little flakes of cork in there just to see what would happen. It actually turned out to be something kind of compelling and interesting. It looks sort of like some Goldschlager, a little bit of gold flakes in there. So that was compelling. All right. Then George takes it 10 steps further by going, all right, let's see how much cork can we drop in. And so he had a lot of variables to play with. How large are the sizes of pieces of cork that you put in the rubber? How much do you put in? When does it start to affect the visual? When does it start to affect the manufacturing process? When does it start to affect the wear? These are all things he had to measure out. So we didn't go with 3. We went with stacks to figure out what it would look like, what colors we could use. George tested all these things out. You can see that's probably my PC back in the day. It might have been his PC. It's a little cheaper. But those are the things that we had to do to kind of figure out, was this even possible? And so then we get to the point where, all right, now we kind of know where things are good. So George he built a mold just to get to the basics to figure out where are we going to be with some of the other details. How much can we place in? The reality with rubber, it wasn't that complicated. We put some in. It actually reduced the weight because we were displacing something that was heavy like rubber with something that was lighter like cork. And so we got a major advantage in the fact the rubber kind of fits in. The difficult part came when we started doing EVA. So EVA, for it to actually go into be a part of the EVA, they actually had to extrude it all together. Well, these bits of grains, when you mold them, 1, it wasn't really working. 2, the chunks of cork were stopping up the nozzle when we were making the actual sheets of EVA with the cork in there. So the real problem was getting the cork small enough to where it would actually go through the system, but also would fit. But again, George would figure those things out. So you can see here we have 10% cork, 15, 20%. You can kind of see how much we're adding. The reality is, this is the part where people start to take notice. When you start to layer full cork with rubber with cork and EVA and leather, you start to see that combination actually feels sort of comfortable and understandable. So it's kind of cool from that level. And so we had to do a design that sort of met that look. So we did something where, much like the Lunagram, we actually took a conventional wingtip. And then we had these pieces of cork where we actually had the EVA and the rubber. Just kind of a quick, simple design just to kind of see if this thing actually works.
So before we continue, this is amazing to me. And I'm obviously in awe and learning so much just by watching this. And I hope our viewers are too. But
I think John Lopez is after some free shoes or something. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a size 13. Let's just keep that out there. If you don't want to send me a pair of feet.
He hasn't gotten a free pair of shoes in a while. I think this is what he's gangling for.
Yeah, I am definitely due for a pair. But this, to me, one of the things that comes to mind when I'm just watching you go through this is that this is why a designer needs to be an engineer. Like, this is crazy. This, to me, seems like lab, right? So if you're in high school right now and you hate going to your labs and experimenting and testing, this is very much like a science experiment. Well, what does 10% of the cork do? What does 15% do, right? And how big are the size, how big are the chunks of cork and how small, and mixing them with rubber and see what happens. And these are the kind of things, I mean, wouldn't you say, right? Like, so if you're a student right now in high school and college and you dread going to these labs, isn't this exactly what that's about?
Well, the key is to go into the labs is, one, when they teach those classes, they want you to get everything right because they want you to see what happens when things go right. Because you have to know what happens when you do everything right in order to really learn something when things go wrong. So we know how to make EVA. We know how to make shoes. And the reason that we know that this was wrong is because we know how to make the regular shoes. So sometimes it's difficult and painful to learn all those processes, but the reality is you can't start making a mess until you start learning to make it the right way. And the reality is, once you start doing things the right way, then you can kind of experiment. But please feel free to make sure your science teacher knows that you're going to experiment with some different things because you don't want to blow up the school by accidentally putting the wrong things together. They're there to keep you alive as well. So, yeah. And the reality is, a lot of designers are engineers. A lot of designers are fashion. Depends on which side you lean. This is more of an innovative slant to where we're supposed to have trouble, make things explode, and do wrong in order to get to the right answer. And in the job I had at Kohan in innovation, I would say that we were lucky to get maybe 1 out of every 10 ideas out the door because we were trying some risky things. And that's not usually the case in fashion. So here you'll see these are the 3 components that we were sort of building from in order to make our shoe. There's a EVA with cork midsole, there's the rubber with cork midsole, and these are the 2 pieces. And design was based on the original Lunar Grand and how it worked. So here we are. We built a mold. You can see the factory was excited. They had to burn off the flash, and just wanted to show you this material fits in the mold, and what you get is the excess. Once they squash it down, just like a waffle that's overfilled, they cut the extra flange off so you get the nice shape that you expect out of a shoe. Here's final parts. You can see it gets a little rough around the edges because the cork is taking up some area, but you kind of get the basics. They have it all together. And then you can sort of see, once you put the rubber on, you see the layering. It has its own little effect. And we knew that, one, having the clear rubber, having the cork was a little, I don't know, risky to some piece. So we had the basic rubber pieces on the end that were a little more protective. And again, you can see how it starts to come together, that visual is kind of unique. So we finish out the full of the design. We get actual samples back. We do that. We do some wear testing. The one thing that came from this is, as in Kohan, we were really experimenting with color, with different items, but the fact that we were doing something so natural meant it started to look earthy, crunchy. So people were like, can you do something different? So we actually went with, all right, we kind of got the Oreo effect when we went with all white. So that became something a little more distinct. People were like, yeah, let's push color like that. And once we did men's, of course, the question was, can you do that in women's? And so more than just a women's shoe, can you actually do it in a heel? The one part was we actually created this piece that was, instead of just doing a wedge, because we knew that if we did a full wedge, people would think we were doing the same shoe that I was told, we're just going to put a fabric wrapper out in. We didn't want people breaking out their knives to prove that we were actually making it. So we actually wanted to cut a hole so you could actually see this is how it works. Well, the production was this, man. We had to make 2 pieces. We actually have the hole there, rubber there. And you can see, here's sort of our first little prototype to see kind of how it would look, how it would be built. And then we started getting more samples back. We got reflective. I think this was reflective as well. But you can see how the cork added up. And then we got to the part where we built out the line. You can see we have different details. The goal was, let's actually have the interior have a piece of the blue cork actually exposed through. So even when you look on the inside of the shoe, you can see the details of the cork popping through. And this was just kind of what we played with. The reality is, then we went even further, started doing some more, not just reflective, but other materials to kind of play up the fact that we wanted to be modern and do something different. All that said, the company was sold, and they went another way, which actually was kind of cool. It's actually what's out now, the 0 Grand. So the cork actually never made it to life after all the work we did, but that's just how it works. The one thing it did convince me is to go out and buy a pair of Birkenstocks. I'm not really a fan of the sandals with the toes, but I found this one where it covers up the whole shoe. It's called the London. It's amazing. Like, I had never worn a cork shoe. You first put your foot in it, and it hurts because it's like a big rock. Conforms. I made myself wear it for 2 days. Most amazing shoe. I bought like 3 of them online. They were all $20 because no one wanted this weird looking white nurse's shoe. I packed up and stored up. So
really, just
wanted to take you through a little bit of what looks like an innovation project. And that's what we have for today.
So two major takeaways for me. One, bring cupcakes and cookies to meetings, particularly if you're trying to get a job. And 2, I think I already forgot what number 2 was. I'm so focused on the dessert part.
I got number 2. Number 2 is write things down. Take notes as you're going so you know what number 2 might be. I'm sure he'll come up with it by episode 18, 19, 20. We'll have those questions all lined up. He's got it now.
You just got a great look into Jeff's mind, and now you know how to make your own cork shoes. And now you can be rich. You
I'm
can
waiting
sell
for
1 billion
somebody.
pairs of shoes.
I don't know if they'll sell 1 billion, but if you make some, hook me up. I wear size 12. John Lopez needs a size 13. He already said,
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
just wanting
Yes,
this. I'm just
indeed.
wanting this. So thank you for joining us on another episode of Glad You Asked. Again, if you have questions, hit us up at GladYouAsked.today. Notice how we work that. We've been working that into our actual videos now so that we don't have to pretend to read it out loud. Let's make sure I spelled it correctly. So
We're getting better, man. The goal is progress, not perfection.
thanks, and see you next episode.